If you look at the number of children born without both a mother and father in the home, in around 1960, that was only 5%, rare. And if we want to get America back to, say, 1960, where this was almost unheard of, we have to fundamentally change these programs. It's something our slumbering press corps ought to take up with our candidates for president and see if they plan on doing anything about it, since the war on poverty in the 1960s can, I think, universally be declared a complete failure. Every year, of course, I am lobbied by people who want the government, therefore, to take up an even greater role in their children's life, be it daycare, be it preschool, be it after-school programs, whatever. They clearly want the children raised by the government.
That was Representative Grothman of Wisconsin talking about government dependence. This speech on the House floor was picked up by pretty much every leftist media outlet, with some calling it straight out of The Handmaid's Tale, while others, like CNN, did what they always do: call it racist.
Finally tonight, while many conservatives are planning for 2025, one of them is talking about the 60s. Republican Congressman Glenn Grothman believes welfare programs introduced decades ago, like food stamps, has led to the decline of the American family. Now, I fact-checked the economics of this before, when Congressman Byron Donalds made that same argument. You can feel free to watch that. But as Grothman spoke, he made this observation with a nostalgic twist.
Every year, of course, I am lobbied by people who want the government, therefore, to take up an even greater role in their children's life, be it daycare, be it preschool, be it after-school programs, whatever. They clearly want the children raised by the government. So I hope the press corps picks up on this, and I hope Republican and Democrat leadership put together some sort of plan for January in which we work our way back to where America was in the 1960s.
Just to be very clear, this was the 1960s.
I will leave it up to you whether or not you consider it to be sexist, racist, or any other kind of ist. But in my mind, the overall shift towards more government has been undeniably a disaster to the country and society at large. With that said, make up your own mind about his comments. Here they are.
I want to address some issues that I've addressed from this podium in the past, but I think the American press corps has still not picked up on them. And they're issues that ought to be debated in the upcoming elections, because I think over time they have a profound effect on America. When I talk to people my age and up, they are almost uniformly concerned about where America is going. And they feel America is not as great a country, particularly as great a country to raise children in, as the America that they grew up in the 70s or 60s or 50s. And when I ask them why, they sometimes have a hard time placing it, and they list different things. But one of the things they all talk about is the breakdown of the family. And you have to wonder why this has happened, or why they feel the family is not as strong as they used to. But they're right if you look at the statistics. If you look at the number of children born without both a mother and father in the home, in around 1960, that was only 5%, rare. Then the Lyndon Johnson-led federal government began a so-called war on poverty. I call it a war on marriage. And between 1960 and the mid-1990s, that 5% figure went up to 40%. Now you might ask, was this just a coincidence? Did people believe in God less? Was getting married first as important? How did it happen? The American public should be aware that there are some people who always did want it to happen. Going back to Karl Marx, founder of Marxism, very connected with communism the scourge of the 20th century, there was a goal to break down the family. They felt for the government to become preeminent, the family must shrink. And the most important factor in raising children was no longer mother and father, it was the government. So, beginning in the 60s, a variety of programs were passed, and kind of surprising because today we talk about equity was close to equally. You would think the government would treat all Americans the same. But these programs provided benefits to people who had a certain income level. And if you had a very low income level, either because you weren't working yourself, or let's just take a woman as example, because there was no husband in the house working, you therefore became eligible for a variety of benefits, some of which began in the 60s and some of which have been added since that time. We are aware of these benefits. One of the most generous is housing for people without a major breadwinner in the home, and that can amount to a $700 or $800 or $900 a month benefit. We're all aware of the food stamp benefit, which you're eligible for if there's not a man who's a breadwinner in the house. We have medical benefits. We have something called Pell Grants, which provide free college both to parents of people who are in poverty or a parent in poverty and to that person themselves. I'd like to recount an anecdote on Pell Grants. I've given a talk like this for many years in Wisconsin. I'd always give them to what used to be called the Tea Party movement, which was usually made up of a bunch of guys who were over 60 years old. But I talked about the benefits that the government gave to people who weren't married at that time. And I talked to a young gal, because she was different from anybody else, and I asked her what she thought about my talk. And she told me, she said, well, me and my husband got married before we had children, but none of my friends are getting married. They get free college, which is right. I wonder whether Senator Pell, before he came up with the Pell Grants, knew that within 30 years of introducing the Pell Grants, the young people would catch on that the government wanted them not to get married so that that was the way their children would get free college, or they themselves would get free college. We now have TANF program, which gives cash benefits to people. Indeed, there are over 70 government programs in which your benefits are based on percent of poverty, which is to say you get benefits if you are not working hard and if you are not married to a spouse who is working hard, because as soon as you have one person who's working kind of hard, they're going to make enough money, they're not eligible for all these programs. So when you consider the powerful forces who wanted to get rid of the family, perhaps this is not a coincidence. In the 1960s, in addition to the Marxists, we had the angry feminist movement. And there were feminists like Kate Millay, a name I remember from my youth. If you look up her speeches or comments, she wanted to break down the family and not have men in the family. And I don't think it's a coincidence that at the same time these programs were expanding, the power of the feminists in this institution increased, and the result was we're going to have less men in the family. Now you ask, who is harmed? Oh, another big program, the Earned Income Tax Credit, which can easily give $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000, which was formed by Jack Kemp, an entirely misguided Republican who felt it was good to put another program conditioned upon not having a good breadwinner in the household. In any event, I think when all these programs are done, we did work our way up to a point in which 40% of the children were born without two parents in the house. The effect of this, not only on the children, but on the men, was huge. There is an important author by the name of George Gilder, who we have long since forgotten, but he's still alive, still kicking. Hope he's listening to me. George Gilder investigated what was sometimes called a ghetto in Albany, New York. And he found a young couple, an unmarried couple, when the gal got pregnant. And he expected, back in those days, when you had an unmarried couple and the gal got pregnant, that was cause for concern. People were not happy that the gal was pregnant. It was like, what are we going to do? But he found out already by the 1970s that it was actually cause for celebration. And the mother and the father went from government office to government office, picking up all these benefits. It meant that she would no longer have to live with her mother, and he wouldn't have to live with the father. He shouldn't be living in the household, but as a practical matter, he was. So a benefit for having a child out of wedlock was all of a sudden you got housing. Now, since that time, we've done something called a Title 42 tax credit, in which the government pays for 70% of housing that a property developer, who may also be a campaign contributor, is able to build low-income housing, new low-income housing, superior to housing or superior to rental properties, which most other people get, and people below 1% of poverty are able to live in Section 42 housing, and the property developer, who has now built very nice properties, because the government's paying for 70% of them, he becomes very wealthy, and the new family or the new mother and child wind up living in an apartment nicer than most other people live. But in any event, George Gilder's observation was not only does this put the child in the long run in a more difficult position, and people who work hard, all sorts of family backgrounds, are doing a tremendous job. I understand that. But another effect that I don't know was necessarily anticipated by Lyndon Johnson is they kind of took the purpose out of the man's life. Because now you have a basket of goodies for the mom, and she may be making $40,000 a year, $30,000 a year, and pretty soon the couple realizes that if the guy is going to come in and make $35,000 or $40,000 a year, materially he has done nothing to add to the family. So he winds up eventually realizing, why am I going to live here? Maybe he moves out on his own, maybe mom kicks him out. But in any event, we've kind of made the man superfluous. I'm sorry. The man superfluous, which I think George Gilder would argue is the major effect of the war on poverty. They've taken away the purpose of the man to be part of a family. In any event, here we are in 2024 in a situation in which about 40% of the children are born to a couple out of wedlock, and obviously with divorces or people breaking up, that number can wind up even higher, which is a huge tragedy for America. And if we want to get America back to, say, 1960, where this was almost unheard of, we have to fundamentally change these programs. Of course, as you have a family breakdown, you have more other problems that we are trying to deal with here. As you have less marriages, you have a higher abortion rate. And so a lot of these abortions have to be attributed to the war on marriage begun by Lyndon Johnson. You have children who maybe don't do as well in school, which can be attributed to this, or are more likely to be depressed, or more likely to commit crime, or have guys who don't have a purpose in life and are more likely to just hang out and do drugs and that sort of thing. I think this is a huge issue, and it's something our slumbering press corps ought to take up with our candidates for president and see if they plan on doing anything about it, since the war on poverty in the 1960s can, I think, universally be declared a complete failure. And I would ask the press corps to look at this, and I would also ask leadership in both parties, as they plan what they're going to do in January of 2025, do you view this breakdown of the family as something the government should do something about, particularly because, as far as I can tell, it was largely caused by the government in the first place, and people who wanted the breakdown in the government, people like Angela Davis, well-known communist, people like the feminists who were so important in the 1960s, that it appears that not for everybody, but for some of the principals who designed these programs, a goal was the destruction of the family. And of course, they have succeeded in that these single family units are much more likely to depend upon the government. And every year, of course, I am lobbied by people who want the government, therefore, to take up an even greater role in their children's life, be it daycare, be it preschool, be it after-school programs, whatever. They clearly want the children raised by the government. So I hope the press corps picks up on this, and I hope Republican and Democrat leadership put together some sort of plan for January in which we work our way back to where America was in the 1960s.
I think that all government is a waste of taxpayer money.